All right, so our final review when it comes to decimals is division. Now, this video will probably be a couple minutes longer than the previous ones because there's actually two different types of division that we have to look at. The first one is when I'm dividing a whole or a decimal by a whole number. Well, there's no problem really when it comes to dividing by a whole number because I have two steps to remember. I raise my decimal, so I know it's going to be in the right spot. And then when I raise my decimal, then I'm just left with division, and I'm going to do the math. We all have been dividing since 4th grade, so that shouldn't be a difficult process. It's the next step that gets a little confusing, and you want to make sure that we do it correctly. But raise my decimal, do the math, I should end up with the right answer. Now, sometimes I can do that rather quickly. Sometimes they give me questions that I have to divide over and over and over and over again until I get the final answer. However, when I look at this, notice how they show you to do the work. I have steps. I have answers, but I have these steps here. Notice how I've always taught you to do it by showing your work. In the multiplication, I had a couple of you that did not pass the assignment because you didn't show me any work at all. Well, it's going to be the same thing every time I give a math assignment. We have 3 more weeks of school, and every math assignment I give you, you have to show me your work. And if you don't, you're not going to pass it because half of the points come from showing your work. Make sure you show your work. I'm going to show you exactly how I want to see it. Notice on number 4, I have a question mark. Well, that's if you have questions after we review this and you start doing your math, you're not sure what to do. You can bring this back to me, show me that you followed along and you were trying, but you didn't quite get it, and I'll help you. And that's what number 4 is for. So number 1, I have a division sentence. I could type this into the calculator and get an answer, but I'm going to get 1 point out of 2, which is a 50%. So I have to be able to set it up and I have to be able to do the math. First thing I have to do is actually build a division problem. This is a number sentence, a division number sentence specifically, which I can't show my work on. So I have to do a division box, which number 3 is set up as. So I'm going to do my division box, and which one goes inside my division box? The same one that I enter into a calculator. Now, here's one of the things that you can do. You could type this into your calculator, divide it by 8 and find out what the answer is, but then you have to work through the steps and prove it. Okay? I have some of you doing that, and that's fine. Going in reverse, you're showing me that you know how to do the steps. I'm fine with that. Okay? But I have to see the steps, and the steps have to be right. So I have to make sure that I know which is which. My first one is my dividend. And remember we say dividend sounds like it's inside because it's inside the box. But it's divisor outside, the OR on the outside has to be my second number. So I know I'm going to have 16 and 4800ths divided by 8. This is a straightforward division of decimals by a whole number. So I have 2 steps. I raise my decimal up, then I simply divide. So when I know my decimal's in the right place, then my division becomes pretty basic. 8 goes into 16 how many times? Well, we know this because if you put this multiplication sign here, you can remember what the process is. And we just make a loop every time until I have a 0 as my remainder. So I'm doing multiplication here to be able to subtract and their difference bring down until I get to my final answer. My final answer in division is called the quotient. 2 times 8 is 16. I subtract those and I have a 0. Well, if I have a 0, then I have to bring down my 4. When I bring down my 4, I still have to ask, how many times does 8 go into 4? Well, it doesn't. However, because it's holding a place value, since it doesn't, I have to say, well, it goes in 4 times, 0 times, or it goes into 4 0 times. And I have to put that 0. I have to hold this place value. If something comes down, something has to go up on my division line. So I'm going to bring down my 8 instead, which is going to give me 8 going into 48, and that is an even number. So I'm going to take 6 times 8, which is 48, and I have a remainder of 0, which lets me know that that is my final answer. So I have 2 600ths for my final answer. Now notice on mine, I dropped my answer line way down here, because there are times that when I divide, I have to keep going until I get to a final answer. If I would type this into my calculator, you notice that there's only 1 decimal space in the math problem. But when I type it in my calculator, I notice that there's like 4 decimal spaces to my answer. So I have to keep dividing until I have a 0 remainder. Once again, I have to build my division box, and I have to have my first number as my dividend. My second number is my divisor, and then I work to get my quotient. I can divide a decimal by a whole number, so my step number one is to raise my decimal up, and then I just do the math. So 8 goes into 19 how many times? Well, 8 goes into 19 twice, because 2 times 8 is 16, and 16 gives me a remainder of 3. Well, my remainder of 3 then lets me bring down my 1 and ask how many times 8 goes into 31. Well, I know 8 times 4 is 32, so 4 would be too much. So I have to do 8 times 3, and 8 times 3 is going to be 24. When I subtract those, 31 minus 24 is going to be 7. Bring down my 7. Now, this is where we're going to have to keep going. And notice on my division box, I left some open space because I'm going to have to start adding zeros in order to keep going. Notice all the steps and how specific I am at showing my work, because this is what I expect from my students every time we do division problems. I will expect it on your assignment. You have 20 questions, 10 of them are doing this. I've done my best to make sure, and I've gone back and I checked it, that I don't have any of them that continue going out and out and out and out and out forever. Okay, so I try to be nice doing that, but I still will require you to show your work. Back to the problem, 8 goes into 77 how many times? Well, I know 8 times 10 is 80, and if I go out 10 times, I didn't go enough on my previous number. Okay, but it doesn't quite go to 80. So I want to go with 9 because 9 times 8 is what? Well, that's 72, and that leaves me with 5 left over. Now what? Well, now I have to add a 0 and bring it down. And once I bring it down, then I can keep going with my division. 8 goes into 50 how many times? Well, I know that 8 times 6 is 48, which is pretty close to 50. So 6 times 8 is 48 with a remainder of 2. Now I have to add a 0 and bring it down. Now I have 20. 8 goes into 20 how many times? Well, 2 times 8 is 16. That gives me pretty close. So I'm going to have to do 2 times 8 is 16 with a 4 left over. Now I have to add a 0 and bring it down. That gives me 40. That one's my multiplication of 5s. 8 times 5 is 40. That gives me a 0 balance. So I know I've gotten to the final point of my question. So I went from 1 decimal point, but I go out 4 decimal positions, and that's fine. What's not fine is if it went out 10, 11, 12 times. Okay, so if I check my work, when I start getting into that 6th, 7th, I've probably done something wrong. And every once in a while, when I go back and I look at your work, it may be something as simple as when you brought down the 7, you changed it to a 9. A lot of you have gotten sloppy with your handwriting. Your zeros look like 6s. I found a lot of those on your multiplication. Or maybe you just did the wrong multiplication. You said that 9 times 8 was 71. Okay. So when you show your work, I can show you where you messed up. Then you can correct it, get the right answer, and then get points back. All right, so number 3, it's already set up for me. Now, if you could write this small and keep everything lined up, then please do. I am able to expand this to where my typing can be still large enough for you to see and read from your computer. If you can't write that small, I had some of you try to squeeze your multiplication of decimals in those little workspaces instead of rewriting the problem and taking half a second to do that. And then trying to line everything up, you got off, and that's why your answers were off. So if you need to rewrite it, please do. But because I'm able to expand it, I just left it right here and lined everything up. First thing you do, no matter what, either you rewrite it or use this one that they have on the paper and bring my decimal up. Straightforward, dividing a decimal by a whole number. So once my decimal's in the right place, then I'm going to divide. 4 goes into 20 5 times. Because 5 times 4 is 20, which gives me 1 left over. With that 1 then, I'm going to bring down my 6, which is 16. And 4 goes into 16 evenly. Now, caution yourself here, because 4 does go in evenly, but that doesn't mean my answer has stopped. Because even though when I multiply and I get a 0, it doesn't mean I don't have anything left. I have to continue bringing everything down until they're gone. So when I bring that 4 down, I know I have to go out 1 more decimal place. And 4 goes into 4 1 time, which gives me my 0 balance. So making sure that I use up all those decimal places is important when I'm doing division of decimals. When I end up with my final answer, then I have 5 and 41 hundredths. So showing all my steps, showing all my steps, showing all my steps, lining everything up, making sure that my math is correct. What the calculators are for. The calculators are not there for you to just type in a problem and hit enter and give me an answer. Doesn't work. You have to show me that you know how to do it. All right, so then our second half of the video is a little bit more difficult. Not that it's hard to do, it's just remembering I have to caution myself when I get into questioning what type of math I'm doing. When I'm talking about dividing decimals by a decimal, I have to start by asking, can I even do that? And that answer is no. I can't divide a decimal by a decimal. My divisor cannot be a decimal number. Later this week, when we get into the fractions and we start doing division of fractions, it's the same answer. I can't divide fractions. But in the same way that I know to flip that second fraction and create a new math problem that I can do some changes to this one. We had 3 letters to remember how to change it. OOU. On your notes, you should be writing down what those mean. They mean over, over, up. I have to go over on the outside, over on the inside, and then I have to go up. Well, specifically, what does that mean? And when we got to a couple of problems in chapter 6, I had some of you that couldn't tell me what OO. You knew it was over, over, up, but you didn't know exactly what that meant. So we're going to take notes here so we know exactly what those mean. So the first over means on the outside, it's where I'm starting because my divisor cannot be a decimal. I have to move my decimal from left to right, excuse me. I have to look this way, to make it a whole number. So if there's 1 decimal point, I have to move it 1 time. If there's 4 decimal points, I have to move it 4 times. If there's 3 decimal points, I have to move it 3 times. Whatever it takes to make it a whole number, and that means there aren't any decimal spaces behind it. My second over means I have to repeat that process on the inside, other than I'm not making it a whole number. Okay, so on the inside, I'm going to move over from left to right the same amount of times. So if I moved it once on the outside, I go to the inside, I move it once. If there aren't any decimals, then I have to add a decimal and add a 0 and move it 1 time. If there's 5 decimals, and I only moved it once on the inside, or on the outside, then on the inside, I still only use it once. Therefore, I have 4 decimal spaces on the inside. However many times I do it on the outside is I repeat that same number of steps on the inside. Had some of you, the very first time we did it around, you were making a whole number and then moving a whole number, and we had different amounts of shifting, and you always got your answer wrong. So my outside determines how many times I'm going to move it. I just repeat the same number on the inside. I can end up with a decimal on the inside. That's fine, because we just looked at 3 problems where I can divide a decimal by a whole number. I just cannot have a whole number on the outside. My divisor cannot be a decimal. Once I've moved it on the outside, moved it the same number of times on the inside, then I just bring it up. That takes me back to the first set that we looked at. Once I bring my decimal up, then I simply do the math. With that said, notice how they have this set up for you. Notice that they're showing you that there's a little bit of a different shifting. We looked at these, multiplying by 100, dividing by 100. Okay? So they said, well, you can look at it. Notice they say can, you don't have to. Shifting the decimal 2 times, shifting the decimal 2 times is the same as saying, well, on the outside, my divisor, I have to multiply by 100 because I'm making it a whole number. And if I multiply on the 100 by 100 on the outside, then I have to multiply it by 100 on the inside. You can look at it that way. It's kind of like the whole metric system where I'm shifting by 3 to get a different decimal. But if I just look at it as that I have 0.55 and I'm shifting it 2 times to make it a whole number, and I have a 0.2 on the inside, that means I have to add a 0 and shift it 2 times on the inside and bring it up, and then I can divide. I think it's a lot easier than trying to figure out if I'm multiplying by 10, 100, 1,000, and repeating that information. Either way, as long as you show me your work, how you got there, and you got the right answer, then you're good to go. So we're going to do, once again, 3 practice problems. The 4th one is in case you have questions and we need to work together. The first 2 are going to have to be set up in division boxes. So I'm going to have my first number as my dividend, my second number as my divisor. I divide them to get my quotient. Once I have it set up, then I look, I cannot divide by a decimal. So how many times will I shift my decimal? 1 time. Notice there are 2 decimal positions on the inside. I don't care how many are on the inside. I know if I go on the outside once, I go on the inside once. And then over, over, now I bring it up and I line it up directly where it needs to go. Then I do the math. So digit by digit, 8 or 7 goes into 8 one time, and 1 times 7 is indeed 7. So when I subtract them, I get a remainder of 1. Well, 7 will go into bringing that 7 down, 17 twice, because 2 times 7 is 14. That gives me a remainder of 3. 17 minus 14 is 3. I bring my 5 down. I keep going until I run out of digits to bring down. 7 goes into 35 5 times. That's an even number, and I don't have to keep going because I don't have to add zeros. I don't have anything left over. So my final answer, my final quotient is just 12 and 5/10. Well, this one is going to give me a little bit of a bigger problem here. I have 72 and 24/100ths as my dividend, 5 and 6/10. So I got a double-digit number that I'm going to have to divide there with. Well, okay. Let's see if it changes how I do it. How many times do I have to shift my decimal on the outside? Well, I have 1, so I can only shift it 1 time. And if I shift it once on the outside, over, then I have to go on the inside and shift it 1 time on the inside, over. So I have over, over, and then I go up. So now I'm working with 56. Does that change how I do my math problem? It doesn't change my math problem at all. 56 goes into 72 1 time. 1 times 56 is 56. When I subtract those, I get a remainder of 16. I bring down my 2. Well, when I think about 15 going into 16, I could get 3, but that's going to take me over 162. Okay? So I make sure that when I do that, by checking, I type into my calculator, well, I think it goes in 3 times, 56 times 3, that gives me like 168. It's too much. So I can only go in 2 times. 2 times 56 then is 112. It seems like it's really small, but when I subtract, I find out that my remainder is indeed smaller than my divisor, and that's what I have to have. If it was larger, then I would take it in 1 more time. Well, I have 50, and I already used my 2, so now I got to bring down my 4, and 56 goes into 504. Well, that's an even 9 times. Well, if I take my calculator once again and type it in, 504 divided by 56, I know that it's an even 9 times instead of trying to do it in my head, because we don't do mental math. That would give me a 0 balance. I know I've once again gotten to my final answer. So my final quotient is 12 and 9/10 for question 6. Well, holy cow, 7 gives me 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal spaces on the inside and 2 on the outside. It doesn't change how I'm doing it. Now, when I first tried typing these, I couldn't get everything lined up, no matter how big I expanded it, because I ended up cutting off question 8. So what I did is I rewrote the problem where I had more space. I would strongly encourage you to do that as well, because the majority of you cannot write as small as that paper is going to require for you to show your work. I just duplicated what it has. I see that I have 2 decimal spaces on the outside, which I can't do. So I have to do my over, and then my up. I have to move 2 times on the outside. If I move 2 times on the outside, then I have to move 2 times on the inside. When I move 2 times on the inside, then I went over, and now I got to go up. Now it's in the right position. Now I can divide by 21. 21 does not go into 1. 21 does not go into 13, but 21 goes into 135, 6 even times. Well, not even, but 6 times 21 is going to give me 126. So when I subtract those, I end up with a remainder of 9. I bring my next digit down, which is a 4. 21 goes into 94 how many times? Well, I could type it into my calculator, 94 divided by 21 equals, and I'll say it goes in 4 times with decimal spaces, which I just need the 4. 4 times 21 then is 84, so I have 10 left over. With my 10, I'm going to bring down my last one, which is a 5. Maybe I'll need to bring down a 0 and keep going. Let's see, 105 divided by 21. No, that's 5 even times, isn't it? Which is 105. So I don't have any remainders. I don't have to add zeros and keep going. I know that my quotient is just 6 and 45 hundredths. So that is reviewing Decimals. I think I got it done pretty close to that 20-minute mark. Just remember there are two of these that we're doing. On the front side, you're going to be doing dividing a decimal by a whole number. All that is raise my decimal up and divide. On the back side, the back 10 is dividing a decimal by a decimal, which I cannot do. I have to shift over on the inside over, and then I have to bring it up. Then, once I've done that, I can do the math. So make sure you're doing all 20 questions. Make sure you're showing me all of your work. And then if you have questions after you've watched this video, come back and we'll work on those 2 extra ones and we'll walk you through those steps again.